complicated. The way I see it is that people have different motivations for the horrible things that they do, and some of those motivations might be based on their beliefs, but essentially I don't think that terrorism is about religion at its core at all. Well, I suppose that terrorism could be about religion as a factor, but it's one motivation amongst many.
No, not necessarily, not purely about religion. That's one of the elements. I think other than religions related to territory, ethnicity, history, government, contemporary politics. So religion is definitely an important element, but it's not conclusive.
Yes, I do believe that terrorism is about religion. It's directly caused from religion, but there's also a military tactic, except those using it definitely have a religious motivation.
I don't think terrorism is about religion, but I think like it's if you have like religious beliefs, it gives you more power and more it entices you into acting.
Religion tends to make people more extreme to turn towards that.
For example, political terrorism is just like you might die for a cause that might not succeed, while religious is like you might die but for a greater cause. So I think it's not about religion, but religion helps in understanding terrorism and acting.
I think terrorism isn't about religion at all. It's always been there. It's not a new thing linked to the 21st century and Islam.
Religion in its Abrahamic sense, so we're talking about Christianity and Islam and these other, ancient books and texts. I don't think it's that at all.
Well, my answer will depend on how we interpret your question. If what you mean is whether religion is the root cause of terrorism, the answer will obviously be no. If we take a long view over the last 2 centuries or so, we will see that many acts of terrorism have been committed in the name of secular causes, revolutionary causes, such as the French Revolution, the Russian anarchists, the Bolsheviks. To put things in a perspective, we can remember that the Red Brigades are responsible for 14,000 acts of violence. Also, we should bear in mind that it's notoriously difficult to draw sharp boundaries between secular things and religious things and their propensity to terrorism. It all depends on how we interpret the question, but also how we interpret the concept of religion.
I would define religion as a belief in something or another greater than what is on earth and physical. Either some belief in a metaphysical kind of afterlife or reincarnation.
I would define religion by saying believe in a higher force, not necessarily a god, but I don't know, something out there that has control over life on earth, and they also, I think, believe in a holy script of some sort.
Religion to me is a really personal thing. Nowadays, I think with mondialization, people don't have a single religion. I think you choose to have faith in the way you do, the way you want. All the people who are following the same religion doesn't express their faith the same way and doesn't live the same way.
For me, a religion is it's a way of life. That's a religion for me. It's something that you follow coherently, daily, rule by rule, and as a guide to the way you live. I wouldn't say it's a bad religion, because terrorists don't think of terrorism as a way of life. They don't think that my way of life is to destroy people's lives or to cause harm to innocent people. That's not what they believe. They believe that they're fulfilling some kind of spiritual deed or some kind of justified vengeance,
If you say that religion is about faith, an act of faith, I guess you can say that terrorism is about religion in that way. I guess religion to me is, like I said, really personal. So you're supposed to live your religion and your faith in a way that doesn't affect and impact other people. So in that way, terrorism is the opposite of religion to me.
both secular causes and religious causes can be seen as sacred. But I think the answer depends on what sort of questions we ask. For our purposes, I think it makes sense to distinguish between the notion of secular and the notion of religious, but at the same time have in mind that in both cases we can have some people who see their causes, secular or religious, as sacred.
If you look at the motto and ethos behind specific terrorist organizations, definitely based in religion, all the supposedly fundamentalist values originate there. Not glorify, but just give some sort of purpose to acts of terrorism and the whole meaning that such organizations as ISIS have.
The motivation of religion is basically to give a sense of meaning to a person's life and also a sense of community.
In any sort of scenario where people are feeling helpless or like outcasts in any sort of society, there can come a group of people who use specific values and beliefs to make other people relate to them and kind of follow the sort of leadership that they create.
I think everyone wants to belong somewhere to something, and I think terrorism is giving that to some people. They're giving them a purpose. Some people are just like going to Syria because they feel like they want to fight for something, they want their life to mean something.
In his study of terrorism, Mark Sageman observed a number of terrorist groups and terrorists, and some of them acted in the name of religion, and what he discovered that most of these people actually didn't share even interest in particular beliefs or practices, and they were more interested in belonging to a particular group of people and felt committed to that group of people. He calls them the bunch of guys. So we shouldn't assume that all those things that are committed in the name of religion are actually related to people's religious beliefs and practices. Although it's quite important to remember that the fact that we perceive that these acts are committed in the name of religion, this fact itself has become an important factor in what's going on, in how we see terrorism.
Emotionally, they're somewhat having problems with identity and also the fact that they need to do what they do simply because they need that feeling of superiority.
Religion is a thing that has always been used by people to do things and to say things and to gather people. So religion has a great power because people put their faith in it, and as it happened in Ireland and as it's happening now with the Islamic State, religion is a great tool to manipulate people and to have them do whatever you want them to do.
I think religion enhances hatred because it has good impact on people. Like if you for example believe that there's something after death, or like you can go to heaven, it kind of gives you support in life if you're like lost, but also like it can also give you support saying that I know I'm doing the right thing because my religion tells me it's the right thing.
To the point where a person who has an extremist view thinks that they have the right to terrorize other people who don't believe in what they believe.
Terrorism is the weapon used by groups of people who don't have the means to be heard, so they try and do things that shock people to install terror, so they have an impact.
You know, it's triggered by something. You know, there are many answers for this. My opinion is the Western intervention. I think that, you know, meddling in other countries' autonomy and their ability to take care of themselves not only abuses people, but it breeds a whole generation of hate towards the West and people that, you know, look at these people like scums and with hate in their hearts.
For me, it's more vengeance than religion, hatred of some sort, or trying to make others conform to the same situation as them. It relates to control of territory, reclaiming what is supposedly righteously theirs. and be governed by their own ideas and morals rather than by those that others have imposed on them.
People may think that they are agents of God's will when they bomb abortion clinics or drive the infidel out of their homeland. On the other hand, some people believe that they're tools of ultimate justice when they, for example, assassinate government ministers because they see these ministers or their advisors as the oppressors.
Could be a form of escapism because they're not particularly satisfied with the life they're leading.
The obvious context of this conversation is Daesh and what's going on in the Middle East.
Some people choose to join Islamic State simply because they feel alienated from Western culture and Western society.
So here, of course, the religion in question is Islam.
And some people actually believe literally the Quran and Hadiths, so they're motivated by that to commit terrorism.
It focuses on Islam, and I think it's the most known because it's the one that the media focuses on. But like, there's also like Jewish terrorism and Christian terrorism. I understand why European country focused on Islamist terrorism because it's the one that struck us directly. But we should not forget that there's also other kinds of terrorism.
Medias and everyone is speaking about terrorism related to Muslim people, but terrorism has always existed and it's been political, it's been a lot of things, and it's not always related to religion.
Well, we know that terrorists have taken Islamic scriptures as a basis, as an attempt to justify their actions.
Some people tend to generalize about Islam because of the acts of terrorism committed by some people in the name of their religion.
Islam is giving them the purpose, however, Islam isn't necessarily the sole root cause, simply because there's plenty of moderate Muslims who don't feel the need to commit terrorism. It's more of a case of people cherry-picking bits of the Quran that they like and treating them literally.
Also, we shouldn't assume that people who have acted in the name of particular tradition, Islamic or Jewish or Christian, actually share all the doctrines and concepts and ideas and even have interest in those religions.
There are something like 1 billion Muslims in the world, or more, 1 billion plus. 1 billion, that's 1/6 of people on earth, or 1/7, I think it is. To say that Muslims are, susceptible or likely to become terrorists or terrorist sympathizers like David Cameron has branded a lot of us. The Muslims would have taken the place over just because of how many Muslims there are.
Let's say we're like 1 billion Muslim in the world, and if they were all terrorists, we'll all be dead by now.
Whether some religious traditions are more prone to violence than the others. This is a difficult question. I'm talking about long-standing religious traditions. Depends on how we interpret it. My answer could be both yes and no. No, because people from any religious traditions, as we again know historically, have committed acts of violence in the name of their religion. And even those religions which are generally regarded as peaceful, for example, Zen Buddhism, can be used for violent causes. Think, for example, of the Japanese fascists who use Zen Buddhism techniques to train kamikazes.
I suppose the question of why terrorists are more keen on relying on Islam than on another religion is the same as asking why anybody follows a certain faith above another. I think essentially that it's the dominant religion in the region where where the terrorists we're talking about now, they formed.
I definitely think that geography has a factor, simply because if you're a Muslim in Britain, or even a Muslim in Eastern Europe, say Croatia, is going to definitely have different views on Muslim in Syria or Iraq. especially in the case of Iraq, where you have a Shia part and a Sunni part. Those places are extremely divided. So geographically, because these two groups have their own bits of Iraq, that leads to more division and more fighting between them.
I certainly don't think there's a specific reason or a particular aspect of Islam that makes it more convenient to adopt.
Christianity was somewhat put aside during the Enlightenment and also by modern science. Since people are identifying themselves as more non-religious, well, with Islam, it just hasn't gotten to that stage because of how events have gone in history.
Essentially, I think that any faith could be interpreted in a way that would lead to destruction.
Whenever people blow something out of proportion, no matter what belief it is, it can lead to such acts.
Whatever the religion is, and maybe like Judaism or like Christianity, it can be like really hard on the extreme side.
If you take the text literally, or if you take what is the subject matter of the religion, of the faith literally, it nowhere says that you must go forth and kill people.
In the Quran it says, if you kill an innocent man or person, it's like you're killing the whole of mankind. And that's the holy book. This is what these people believe in.
Specific verses from the Quran or specific words of Muhammad may be used as a basis for some acts, but I don't think that this is directly related to the religion itself.
When you read the Bible and when reading the Quran, it's like there's always be like a page or like a sentence that made sense 1,000 years ago, but if you read it in the actual context, it will like be totally like kill people that do not abide by your rules.
They have been misinformed, or they have a lack of information. They've been brainwashed. You know, they're missing, a key piece of a religion which is often quoted as being peaceful and standing for peace. Islam means peace. I won't say Muslim terrorists because that is misleading. It's terrorists that happen to be Muslim.
It's an interpretation that is unfortunate.
And I think that religion is good, but when you take it in the larger sense, like it gives you support, but if you read it literally, it's really like narrow and reduces your life to a certain like abiding by certain principles. Religion gives a grounds for terrorists to act because they say that I'm going to apply literally the Bible or the Quran and do what they want me to do, and it gives them support because like I abide by my religion and it justifies my action, so that if I do something bad, since it's not by my religion, I will not be punished afterwards by God or in other instances.
More of a sense of fulfilling their own sense of entitlement, almost, from their belief.
By giving religion this really superior position in society and in dictating life, and maybe believing that it's just so pure and right that it should also be imposed on others.
It's just a misinterpretation of a religion. That doesn't constitute it as a religion.
There have been like an article in, I think it was in the Times like not a long time ago, saying that there was increased hatred against Muslim people, and I think it's like really bad to say that we kind of like overlook a big part of this religion just to focus on like maybe 1% of extreme people.
To blame a whole religion of people on the acts of not even 1%, not even 0.1% of an extreme minority of people is, it's beyond illogical. Because using that same logic, you can apply it to anyone else. You can say that Germans are bad because of what Hitler's done. You can't use small people to generalize across a whole religion of people. That's unfair.
It's really dangerous to create a kind of just general concepts of religious traditions and stigmatize them just because some of those who have acted in their name and committed acts of terrorism.
It was like the extreme part of Islam and not like the whole religion in itself, to make like to differentiate between moderate Muslims and extreme Muslims. And I think like the media is responsible for that, saying that it has been Islamist attack, and not, for example, saying that it has been really extreme attack. I think also about like, do we call it like the Islamic State or Daesh? Because it's like all the time it's like the way you name thing, it can be like really, it can hurt a larger population that is the one that actually does the bad things.
The majority of people in all religious traditions share the same ideas about humanity and about peace. If we think about the interpretations, particular interpretations of religious traditions by particular groups in particular circumstances, then we can say that in certain circumstances religion can be used for terrorist causes, but again for different terrorist causes. We can think, for example, of the situations in which religion is entwined by nationalist causes, such as, for example, in the case of Hamas in Palestine, or the Hindu Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka. Other believers can interpret their religious traditions in a fundamentalist fashion, such as, for example, the American fundamentalist or Islamist fundamentalist, or even some Buddhist fundamentalists. Most fundamentalists are perfectly peaceful people, but some of them might feel compelled to defend their true faith and see themselves as the only true believers, and in certain circumstances to terrorize the rest of ungodly society in the name of their only true faith. Also, there is a peculiar bunch of people who believe, again, they come from different religious traditions, Christian, Buddhist, Islamist, and others, and they can believe that the end of the world is unfolding here and now. Sometimes they're called apocalyptic warriors. And these people, again, most of them are quite peaceful, but in certain circumstances, they might feel compelled to speed up the end of the world and the event of the perfect world, and take arms in their hands for their cause.
I think certainly that if we attempt to impute blame on the Islamic community as a whole for things that have been done, that it is victimizing an entire population the same way that the Jews have been victimized in the past. It's absolutely horrendous. You'd think that we would learn from our mistakes about discrimination, yet we don't. Time and time again we commit the same atrocities.
We should also remember that many acts of terrorism have been committed by state agencies and non-state agencies against religious believers. Think, for example, of Christians in the Middle East, or Muslims in Burma who are terrorized by Buddhists, and also by Jehovah's Witnesses in Nazi concentration camps.
I think the confusion comes from maybe like a misunderstanding, and also a kind of political view that you need to have like a common enemy. There's a bad guy and you want to know who it is. You don't want like to say that there's this big organization, we don't really know who those people are. If you're like threatened by an ideology, you cannot really see who the bad guys are. Having an enemy is reassuring, but it's not true.
What Trump and these people are suffering from is fear, an extreme form of fear. And the natural thing you do when you're fearful is to shelter yourself, to become defensive, to back up, to create barriers, to these people that he deems as enemies. And just as these terrorists are misinformed, Trump is equally as misinformed, arguably.
We have to be secure, but we also have to be smart about it. So we have to get the right people rather than every person.
The situation with counter-terrorist measures being taken over the past 10 years is a mess. 15 years now. What I find so astounding is the fact that it infringes so much on the lives of the ordinary citizen as well. Whilst that's justifiable if you look at it from a perspective of the government owing a duty of care to its citizens, it just doesn't seem proportionate sometimes. I think that the legislature is to an extent going with the public hysteria.
I think this is exactly why terrorism is happening. I think it's just like giving more power and more legitimacy to terrorism.
Implementing these rules, all it does is segregate, people even more. Christians from Muslims and Americans from non-Americans. All it does is cause a divide, and now in 2016, that's what we're trying to avoid.
Therefore, you have this population, second generation of immigrants that were born in France or United States or whichever country in Europe, and they don't feel like they belong because they're rejected, and they don't feel like they belong to their home country either because they don't know anything about it. They have no sense of belonging, and then they go to the internet where there is no filter, no anything, and they can read the propaganda of the terrorists, and they believe it because of these politicians saying things like that.
I think even people who do awful things are still people. They still have human rights. They still deserve to be treated in the way that we would treat any other criminal.
There has to be some kind of destruction that you've suffered in your life. So suffering is another key word, I think.
Religion in moderation can also be part of the solution, simply because if you look at the Ahmadiyya community in London, they're very, very nice people. And they're extremely moderate people as well. So it's more of a case of utilizing education, making sure that people can think independently, so that people don't become indoctrinated into Islamic State once.
The best approach is to kind of level on platform with them so you can understand their hate or their anger, as opposed to just fighting fire with fire, because that never leads to any productive solution.
It's a case of less interventionist Western foreign policy, so that we don't interfere and we don't appear to be the aggressors on countries in the Middle East.
Personally, I think rehabilitation is a much better option. Re-educating people about what's right, what's important, about love one another, and etc.
But the only way we solve these issues is if we educate each other and we can learn from each other, and we can help eradicate really misinformed arguments. Whatever I might be saying right now it might be incorrect. Someone might tell me, what you're saying is incorrect, and correct me, and I might learn from that. So I think it's very productive, and it's important that we engage and we gauge our opinions and arguments in these kind of platforms.